All right. Knock on podcast for the 2025 Hoyt launch. I felt like there was no better person. Well, there's actually several of you that would be equally as good, I think, but I've got B Gold, Brian Gold, one of the lead engineers at Hoyt on the phone so that we can go over the 2025 launch. A lot of big anticipation, people wanting to know what the heck's new, and from some of the little, I think, sneak peeks and early looks that people have got, they're wondering what's really different. But I just got through doing a really in-depth review, and I said that the details are the difference. There's such a difference in the details. And I said that speed, aim, draw cycle, feel, durability, and consumer experience are all key notes to the 2025 Hoyt. So let's get talking about this, Brian. What do you think?
Yeah, it's good to be here. Launch day is always an exciting time of year for us. As we get to kind of wrap up our year, the culmination of everything we've worked on for the last 12 months. Some of these things we've worked on for years at this point.
I was going to
So
say 12
always
months
looking
is
forward to
is not totally accurate. People ask me, the
it.
big question people ask for me is like, what's going to be the knock on bow? And I want to cover that right here at the beginning, just because I think it's important for people to understand that Hoyt has an amazing engineering team, and you guys work really forward on a calendar. And, this isn't like, you're not working in 2 months from now on the 2026 stuff. That stuff has already
Yeah.
been on the docket. So I've told everybody this year I wanted to come in to what your team had been working on and be able to give whatever feedback I could that could have an immediate response from your team. But a lot of this stuff from Hoyt's perspective is mapped out from years, which is very cool to the consumer because they're the ones that benefit from that type of planning and from that type of innovation and testing in the field. But I
Yeah.
came in, I don't know what generation I jumped in on, but I know that you and I have worked on like probably three different risers since the very first one I've got. But this one right here is, the one that I actually built and took with me to my very first hunt of the year and has been with me here till the very, very end. And I made a post today of a bullet hole. It had barely a nick, I think, to the right in it. But I said, what's cool about this bullet hole is that bullet hole came after almost 5 months of me using the new RX-9 Ultra, from Canada through the Rockies, back to the east, then across the pond to Zambia, and then back to the Midwest for whitetail season. And after notching that whitetail tag the other day, I wanted to see how this thing stayed in tune from out of the box to ready to knock, not touching anything other than what comes out of the box standard from the factory. That was the result. And I think that speaks highly of you guys. But where do you want to start with these things?
Um, I don't know. Let's see. See what we've got here.
Start with the speed. That's that's the
There's some big gains there, especially for the model you're shooting.
Yes, yeah. So let's just start out with the RX-9 Ultra. There's a new cam system, but the speeds and the cam system kind of pairs with a new limb for this model and a new pocket as well. But the speeds are crazy. At 30 inches, 8 feet per second, 19 feet per second jump over an RX-8 Ultra for a 29-inch draw. What is it, 16 feet per second for a 28-inch draw? Is that right?
Yeah.
I
Yep.
mean, dude, these numbers are staggering. So jump into the details about this and what we did on the new cam so that we could actually increase this performance at the average guy's draw length is so important.
Yep. So, I mean, Hoyt's history, we've always had, we've taken an approach of really trying to fulfill performance at every draw length. I mean, that's always been critical for us. When you go back to the early days of cam and a half, we're doing draw length specific cams every half inch, which makes it, those bows a little harder to work on, a little more difficult to execute. That evolved into modules, which made it a little more straightforward. And then over the last few years, we've always done multiple cam sizes. And as we've done those cam sizes and then consolidated those into modules, I think Hoyt's always had this, especially if you're a Hoyt guy, if you're a Hoyt customer, you know that there's some kind of overlap draw links where, for example, if you're a 29-inch guy and an Alpha X33 today, a 29 is a ripper on that bow. Last year, a couple of years ago, I know Danny Ferris and Alan Bolin were both around 28 and a half inches, and they were like, I can't believe what I've picked up in this bow model. So we've had performance positions on each model that were really, really well optimized. Then we also had a few draw links that had gaps. And so we decided with Gen 4, we were going to attack those. We were going to go get performance across the board, every draw length. So Gen 4 gets a 5 module system. It optimizes the draw length at every inch. So at say for the 30-inch axle to axle RX9, it starts at 30 inches in max draw, moves down to 29 and gets a new mod, moves down to 28 and gets a new mod. But each one of those mods adjusts a full 3/4 inches and does that in 1/4 inch increments. So for RX9 Ultra, as an example, not only did we pick up performance in the 30-inch spot because that bow got a geometry shift, it got a shorter brace height, but it also shortened the max draw length. That bow's standard max draw length now is 31 instead of 32. It got a little bump from that, and then the rest lives within the modules and that new system we've implemented in Gen 4.
Well, and I think people who just heard that the Ultra went from a 32-inch max down to a 31, I know a few of my friends that are 32s that are like, please tell me that's not true, but there's a long draw option um,
Yes.
that people can move into on some of these models. So please keep that in mind. Um, one of the things that was a big difference for me being away from Hoyt for 5 years and now coming in to this new cam, there was actually quite a bit of changes just on the RX8 models and the Alpha X33. But now we've got the AX2 series, and we have the new RX9 series. And what I love about this cam system is a number of things. One, the 1/4 inch adjustment is really awesome. And what I like about it isn't necessarily the adjustability of the draw length, because I think any mature or seasoned archer can adjust their draw length with a wrist position, how they choke up
Yeah.
on a release, or, honestly, front shoulder is, several inches very
T
easily.
loop. Yep.
Um, but what I loved about having the 1/4 inch adjustments in this mod is also refining the feel of that valley. Because even though you're within a 1/4 inch here or there of a draw length that you might want to have as your destination, that little bit of variation of the quarter front or back really let me find the feel that I wanted on my back end. And when you combine that with the foot that you have as your cable stop, you have two options for your wall hardness. You have the regular, a regular hard wall, or you have a super hard wall, depending on
Yeah.
which way you turn those shoes. And if you face them out to where they're further away from the axle, it'll be a harder wall. And then if you flip them and turn them in to where they're closer to the axle, um, it won't be as rock hard, but it's still a hard wall. It's still a great
Yeah.
wall. And funny enough, I actually have mine on the softer setting. I do have
Yeah.
it on the 85%, but I've been running in that 30 and 3/4 setting on my bows, which I've really liked because typically I shoot a 31-inch draw for target and I shoot a 30 and a half for hunting. I normally choke up a little bit for hunting just because of the bulk of my clothing.
Sure.
So just having that in between was so cool. And well, there's two other things I really like about this new cam, being a non-Hoyt shooter coming into the Hoyt. I
Yeah.
love the little, I don't know what you call it, but the little foot that you put on there for setting your bow down, whether it's top cam
Yeah.
down or bottom cam down. There's a really nice, oval shaped add to the cam that has a rubber gasket around it to where you can set your bow down and your cam isn't just right in the dirt. That's super awesome, and it works really, really well when you combine it with the new Ghost Sticks, the Ghost Sticks 2.0. This has been awesome in a blind or awesome in a spot and stock situation where you're like waiting for something to stand up.
Yeah.
The last thing that I really like about this cam system that you guys have is how robust it is for the thickness that you have, not only on the cam tracks, but also the thickness that you have when it comes to, having any type of pressure from the outside of that cam. That's one of the things that I noticed from a durability point of view on my previous setups. We definitely got the speed by thinning all those walls down on the cam, but any type of accidental, set down or, if something
Yeah.
got tipped over and bumped, it was flattening that cam track quick. And funny enough, actually not on my 9, but on my 8, I tipped that thing over like the very first day I set it up. I had it shooting so good and I tipped that thing over and it like fell off my tailgate, fell cam straight down and then like rolled down the grass. And I was just like,
Not what you
you got
want.
to be kidding me. I picked it up. It was scratched. It had a little bit of stuff, but I just was able to put a little rat tail file on there and the cam track itself, the integrity of it was intact. So I loved that durability, and that's only one of the things on Hoyt that I love the durability of, but that new cam was awesome. Now, in in relation to the speeds that we talked about, we actually have speed boosts in some of the other models too. So do you want to just run through real quick, Brian, what the models are that are new for 2025 and then how the Gen 4 HBX affects all those different models if you could and how they're
Sure.
affecting speed.
Yeah. So starting with Alpha X30 and then Alpha AX229, those are two similar geometries. Our new AX229 got shorter, and then to accommodate geometries, then the brace heights got longer. So it's a little more forgiving in the brace height length, but then also a little more compact for your tree stand ground blind hunting. With that growth in brace height, we lost a few feet per second. So at the 30-inch position, you're going to see us coming from 344 to 340. But this is kind of where the magic happens. When you get down to a 29-inch draw, our comparisons show last year's Alpha X at 325 and this year's AX229 at 330. So we got a 5 foot per second boost at 29, which is a really critical draw length. Over the last few years, I would say, that crossover draw length part, that kind of the bottom of the number 3 mod as it transitions to the number 2, that's the one where there's the most opportunity for performance pickup. And so on that model, we're coming from 316 and last year's Alpha X30, we're going up to 322. So a 6 foot per second gain. The cool thing about that is that we've gained some brace height. So
Yeah, I
you'll
was gonna
see that at
say.
the 30 inches, we didn't store more energy there. So we did take a little bit of a loss with that gain in brace height. But because we were able to reoptimize each one of these modules in the new Gen 4 cam, then you're going to get better performance, but while maintaining the same smooth draw that you've come to expect from HVX cams since they've been introduced, really.
And we also have a new short draw cam, which is kind of a different beast altogether, but it's worth touching on because I
Sure.
think it's important for people to compare apples to apples in relation to a lot of these shorter draw models because a shorter draw model isn't really going to be able to give you an ATA type speed testing because if the cam can't go to 30 inches, then obviously you're not comparing it to something that does go to 30 inches. So, what's really cool about the new short draw cam, and I'm really excited about this for a lot of the youth and a lot of the females out there that have really wanted any of the Hoyt premier flagship models, but they've wanted them in the low poundage that they can pull
Yeah.
or in a draw length that they need. And so, for example, on an RX9, if you have the SD cam on there, that'll go from 23 inches to 27 inches, and you can now get 40-pound max limbs for these bows that will go down to 30 pounds. So with Sharon being a 26-inch draw with a max weight of 40 pounds, she's going to be able to shoot an RX-8, which is going to be a light bow in her hand, which I think is critical for women and youth, is to have an overall bow that isn't weighing
Yeah.
them down and then have something that gives them that spectrum of draw and to have a range to where a youth that does have this flagship bow bought for them, they now have the ability to grow through those cam draw links. So give me a little
Yep.
bit more information on the SD cam and what people can expect from that.
So the way we executed this model is a little different than what we've done in the past. We've got a short draw bow in Eclipse. It's got good performance at each draw length, but I think in a lot of cases, as you get shorter in draw length, you need smoother in draw. Those kind of things kind of pair together with just the frame of person that's shooting there. And so as we took the approach of trying to put as much performance as we could into those, and in some cases got too aggressive. They were some of the most aggressive draw cycles in our lineup of hunting bows and target bows both. So we also get lots of requests for short draw archers, youth, women, and just shorter draw length in general. They want it in the premier models. They want the Ghost Sticks features. They want the pick rail sights. So we attacked the SD models this year by offering an Alpha AX2 and an RX9 in a short draw configuration. So it's its own custom cam. It's got a max of 27 inches max draw, 23 inches on the shortest end. It's done in one module. And what that allows us to do is actually rotate down in half-inch increments for draw length adjustment. And then as that mod rotates down, it gets smoother in draw. So if you're on the 23 or the 24-inch side, you're going to get as smooth a draw as we can provide you so you can shoot as much poundage as we can. And then as you get further up into that cam at the 27, 26 side, you're going to start to pick up some performance so it stays on par with the kind of the standard bow build, not the non SD cam, the Gen 4. It stays on performance right with it at 27 and 26. So
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that for any of those people. And one of the things I really appreciate about the Total Archery Challenge and a progression that's common and that I see is, someone's wife will come with them the first time as a spectator. They'll want to walk along. And then the
right,
next year they come and they've borrowed a bow or they have a bow and they're just picking and choosing a few targets here or there to shoot. But then by that third year, they're there, they have their own equipment, and a lot of times
it's
it's the
on.
best equipment in the family. So I love that we actually have something that's going to be able to like keep that progression happening. Um, well, let's talk a little bit about what kind of continues towards the riser with this setup, because obviously we have the cam, we've got the new mods that allow people to be specific in that 1 inch increment. And this is something, I guess, just to go back and be a little bit transparent to the consumers out there. One of the things that bow manufacturers would love to do, and honestly, I remember back when I started, we actually did this when I was at Matthews, was every single draw length had a cam. had its own cam, not
Yep.
just its own module. And you kind of had to do it that way, especially on the single cams back then. But it became a burden to the retailer because the retailer is trying to stock all these different sizes for all these different models. And it just becomes problematic. And it also, you know, full transparency, it just gets to the point where the retailer is not going to put you forward in the recommendation if they know
Sure.
they don't have
Absolutely.
the inventory there because they want to sell what's on their rack and they want to pay for that invoice and get that out of there. And as a consumer, we don't know that the reason they're going to say, "Hey, try this one," is because they actually know what your draw length is and what poundage you can pull, and that's the only model they have there for you, and they don't want to have to risk you ordering it and canceling that order or anything. That's just reality. So when companies started having these huge draw length ranges in the cams, it definitely became friendlier to the retailer and to the dealer, and it allowed them to have a bigger span of your offering to the consumer, which is ultimately what you want and which and what's great. But having inventory on the wall that you may never sell if that exact fit doesn't come in there is certainly a worry for anybody, not just an archery
Yeah.
retailer. So you can understand why that would happen. So now by having the ability to not have to have a full cam size and the module, you're now able to have the cam and just the module to go on there. The retailers are going to be able to have the ability to make these fit for you more readily, but like we said at the beginning, the speed boosts from these and this new cam system is really, really impressive because it's pretty rare that you can keep the overall cam one size and only replace a modular part of that cam to then keep your efficiency, keep your feel,
Yeah.
and get the performance that you want. But a lot of that comes from the entire package and not just from the cam. So let's talk about, what contributes to that whole propulsion system, which is the limb. We got a brand new limb on these as well, especially on the 9 Ultra.
Yep.
And we have a new pocket, which also adds to a difference in weight. So take us down that rabbit hole, my man.
Yeah. Well, so in this generation, one of the things that we felt like there was room left on the table coming from last year's RX-8 and Alpha X series was weight. We knew there was some room to go cut some weight out of these bows. If you can save weight in the limb, then you can also save it in the pocket. And so we kind of attacked it from three different perspectives. When you look at carbon, you're getting a new pocket and you're getting a shorter pocket span. When we talk pocket span, we're talking about the gap between the front and rear support of that pocket.
Right.
And so we've narrowed this riser up, which has helped reduce twists when we're talking targeted flex and that sort of thing. But then also it just removed excess limb weight. It removed excess pocket weight. So we saved, an ounce and a half in the pocket. We saved a little bit of weight in the limb. We improved torsional stability of the whole system. It allowed us to make some layup changes within that riser to get a stiffer, more consistent platform. And all of that resulted in an improvement in shot experience
Right.
that also came with a reduction in weight. And I think that's for us, we talk a lot about efficiency. Efficiency lives within performance. You don't want to put more in, but you want to get more out. You don't want a stiffer draw cycle to get to 345. You want to get the same draw cycle and you just want to have less friction. You want to have better dynamic efficiency. And so that's our target when we're looking at cam developments, and we're doing the same thing in the risers. So in the last couple of years, we've taken out shock pods, we've taken out limb shocks, we've reduced our damping systems all the way down to a new shortstop that we implemented this year, shortstop 2.0. And that's targeting a new frequency range and amplitude specific to these new bows that are lighter weight. Yep, right there on the front of
Yep.
it. And so, as we refine those risers, the pocket, the limb structures, we get a little different vibration profile. We can tune that damper now that there's less amplitude. We can make the damper lighter, so it saves another ounce. And then what you end up with by the time you put your bow together with an inline system is, you're saving quarter and half pound chunks at a time by the what look like small changes that we've done. It really makes a big difference overall.
Yeah, so one of the things that we talked about, you and I, and we started to get pretty in depth, and this was when I was like, "Hey, let's pause this conversation right now," because I started thinking there's there's been a lot of requests from me to dive a little bit deeper into the technicality of archery and systems and things like that. People are like, "Hey, we like it when you would, have your late night uh drunken podcast where you would just go deep down rabbit holes of arrow
Yeah.
builds and, string material composition and all this stuff." So, you and I were talking about something yesterday, and it was kind of the um bow alignment and the influence of like rotational translation. And we were talking about how now that you have the ability to use bushing systems or spacer systems or whatever it is, every bow company is now addressing the fact that you need to be able to shift that cam a little bit within the limb system so that you can get the center shot and the tune that you're looking for. Because previously, Bose came out with the exact same spacers for the top cam. The bottom cam had bearings pressed in. There was no deviation to that. So sometimes your center shot would be like off center and flaring out, and sometimes it would be
Yeah.
inside. And that would vary depending on how far the archer was drawing that bow back, especially back when we had the cable slides or, like a traditional style carbon rod cable
Sure.
slide, because the further that would slide back, the more kind of leverage you would have turning that riser and twisting that riser. And that kind of complicates several things. So when we look at like rotational translation, that's talking about there's kind of two different aspects of physics in archery when we're drawing the bow, right? So one of the things that's happening is as we're pulling the bow back, this cam is just rotating on an axis, which is the axle. So that's one type of movement, right? But there's
Yep.
another one too. There's us. There's us and the fact that
Yep.
we're actually drawing this way too. So there's multiple components of physics happening. And the relevance to that is how quick you can get a bow to target when those two forces are, hopefully working together. Not always. Sometimes you're
Right.
fighting the one. So you're trying to, whether it's stabilization, whether it's the feel of the draw, whether it's like the type of grip you put on, you're trying
Yep.
to cancel out the one that's being counterintuitive to where you're not only getting to the target, but your pin's staying on the target. So let's talk
Right.
about that shooter experience and how Hoyt is starting to recognize lateral knock travel, not vertical knock travel. So vertical knock travel would be something that a lot of the industry is being taught about, where you're tracing, let's say, the knocking point of the arrow as that bow is held in a fixed position and it's drawn back to its full draw position. How does that knock point raise, or in some point raise and lower and then come back up
Yeah.
again? Or sometimes they've gone down and then up. Sometimes they've done it both, and that can create some wild snake bends rather than a true archer's paradox in that arrow as it's
Sure.
being projected. So dive a little bit deeper into how the Hoyt engineers are actually building strings and cables with your thickness and your twist ratio and the direction of your twists based on some of this, and also how that cam is designed and how the grip position also relates to this magnitude of complexity that's going on to give the user a bow that gets on target and stays on target faster and remains on target through the launch cycle of that arrow.
Yeah. So I'd say this, we'd probably roll that back to the start of the Concept X, our target bow that we launched this fall. We spent a lot of time digging into target bows for the last decade, and then some, looking at spiral style cams, looking at the cam and a half style cams, evaluating flex and twist that's happening in that system, and then really outputting what happens from brace height to full draw. Ultimately, that's really all that matters. The system can move and flex and twist, but ultimately, what happens between brace height and full draw was going to affect you, the shooter. And the more, what I'm going to describe as just induced torque, but the more change from brace height to full draw, the wider the range the bow performs from person to person. And so we spent a lot of time looking at what was available in the industry, what we had done in the past, where we had succeeded, where we had maybe even some surprises, and how good some bows were and why they were that good. We've really started targeting lateral nock travel. We were looking at that from a string position within the space between the limbs. I think theoretically you would want to say, like, my string track's perfectly dead center. If you're just thinking about it in theoretical terms, it's exactly where I want it, except for you're going to pull 15 degrees of angle of cable and lean those cams, and you're going to induce pitch into them. And so now you've got a totally different ball game. And then you're going to let them translate, and the bow's going to go from brace height to full draw and move. And now that angle is going to change again. And so there's a multitude of factors that's affecting what happens from brace height to full draw. The simple of it is, we have attacked the HBX Gen 4 cams, the sector cams within the Concept X, the roller guard systems and their positioning, to, as best we can, eliminate induced torque and any rotation at the grip that is just inherent in the system. And so if you've got some lateral nock travel within a cam system, you come from brace height to full draw, you don't even have to have big pitch changes, but that pitch change ultimately is starting to move that string left or right, just like you talked about. A 27-inch draw person can have a different tuning or setup experience than a 31-inch draw person. And so we're looking to minimize that deviation as much as we can. When you look at HBX Gen 4, we took our test group that we run within the engineering team, and then our outside testers as well. We took the average center shot and cut it in over half in terms of what they were pulling out of the box and setting up. We then, even beyond that, we gave improvements to resolution in the spacer tuning system. And so while as you shift spacers, you get a less dramatic shift because we've got fewer dynamic events happening. The delivery on this new cam system is straighter and cleaner. You also have better resolution. So as you shift that cam, you're not chasing a 3/4 inch tear, you're chasing a 1/4 inch tear from where you decided to set up right down the pipe. And I think overall, that's what it's done, is give a much more consistent experience to all archers at all draw lengths, at all grip inputs, and grip contacts. We're all different. Anatomy plays a role in that. Shoulder position, elbow position, hand size, thumb size plays a big role. You and I talked about that yesterday, and just setting up bows, and how a little bit of thumb side or palm side pressure can affect somebody's overall tuning and alignment. And this new generation of bows has significantly narrowed that window, which also has helped make these bows less critical to spine. You can shoot lighter spined arrows and get good delivery results. So you can shoot on the heavy side or the light side and still get really, really good high level accuracy out of them.
Yeah, that's a really valid point, and one that I had neglected in my kind of my first impression or final impression, I guess, video, which
Yeah.
will be out by the time this podcast is out. Yeah, I didn't talk about the importance of, when a lot of people think of spine, they think of the forces that a compound puts on an arrow, which dynamically it should be an archer's paradox where that arrow is flexing up and then flexing down. Now with a recurve shooter, their paradox is different than a compound shooter
Right.
because they're using fingers, so their paradox is more, you know, side to
Yep.
side, not up and down. But when you have a cam system that you're shifting that position and trying to address a shooter's natural torque that they have, and then the natural torque of the bow, well, now you have this lateral knock travel that starts to attack the spine of this arrow in multiple directions. So that starts to get a lot trickier to not only tune it out of the pipe, but get the groupings down range. And I think some of that is why for me, I am not a huge bear shaft shooter. I
Yeah.
personally really want clean delivery out of the pipe, and then I really look at what the grouping is doing down at the target versus trying to adjust things in or out of what I would like, I would call it my green zone of I
Yeah.
want an arrow that tunes within this thin window of center shot. Even though I might be able to get a bear shaft to shoot them right next to a fletched arrow, if it's outside of that green window of center shot, I feel like it's actually given me a false reading of what's happened. I've built an arrow that's band-aiding a lateral movement that most people aren't going to see. I want my
Sure.
center shot to be within my green zone, and then I want my grouping to, be within the same hole if possible. And the least amount of variable influence you can put on an arrow, the more likely spine is going to respond positively to that adjustment. And a lot of people ask me why I'm able to shoot the arrow that I shoot. I'm kind of right on the line between a 300 and a 260 spine. And if I shoot over 74 pounds, I got to go into that 260 spine. Depending on the cam system, if I shoot lower, then I can stay with that 300. And what I'll tell you is certain cam systems are certainly more aggressive or have a different delivery to that arrow. And so I've really chose the types of setups that I have historically that allow me to get the response that I want and the tune that I want with that arrow shaft. Now, I've got my bow here, so I'm going to just set this thing up for center shot and I'll try to
Yeah.
point it at the camera if I can. I'll just kind of keep it right in there. So I'm tipping it forward. So that is my center shot. I mean, Brian, do you think it gets any better than that?
It doesn't. No.
I'm telling you, dude, this thing is so true down the pipe. And I mean, it has been just the most sweet shooter possible. Now, if that had a different cam system, and honestly, for me on the RX-8, not the Ultra, but the RX-8, I got a very different result than that, which is why I stuck to the Ultra model. Because honestly, I wanted a little bit shorter axle to axle length than what I had with the RX-8, which the 9 is a little bit shorter, which I
Yeah.
really like. But I couldn't get that same results with that same arrow. I had to totally change arrows to try to get that result. But that also has to do with like where that cam is sitting in a module position, which now going back to you
Yep.
guys optimizing that, all of these things are going to start to fall in line. These are all dominoes that really, really factor in. So, what do you think in relation to this, this lateral movement? How much does that affect a person's ability to stay on the target too, because you kind of have to think of it as like pulling a rope through any type of pulley. Or I
Yeah.
just look at it like in my weight room right here. If you're going to do a lat pull, you're sitting directly under that bar and you're pulling straight down. If the seat
Yeah.
was off to the side and you had to pull across that wheel, which is
Yeah.
ultimately what happens with cables on any
Yep.
compound bow, the cables have to be shifted to the side so that you can shoot past them. So you're already implementing torque into the system. So how do you control a necessity of torque to where you can minimize the other? And that string tracking perfectly down that track helps reduce that amount of like friction within that system, which
Yep.
honestly translates for the average guy into being able to keep your pin on a target better left to right, but for the arrow to
Yep.
also go through the system without having deviation. Like you want to be able to bowl a strike without having to have the bumpers on the side, in the gutters,
Exactly.
right? I mean, that's probably the
Yeah.
easiest way to say it.
Yep. Yeah. I think, one of the analogies, and I've put this in some people's hands and it's rung true, but I think as bows have evolved over the last few years, let-offs have gotten higher. We're looking for less holding weight. I was just on a whitetail hunt last week where I sat at full draw for a minute and it felt like 10
Yeah.
minutes. Like, but I was really glad I'm sitting at 85% and I didn't choose 80 that I thought maybe shot a little better in the yard. Um, but as you get into lower string tensions, then grip input has a greater effect on what's going on. And so when you're looking at, you know, what we really focused on in these changes in the cam was what we've talked to as natural point of aim. And I think everybody's picked up a modern bow today and pulled it to full draw. And as you hit the wall, you feel the bow just kind of go through this little
Hmm.
twitch, this little like settling, right? And our bows or competitor bows, at some point you've experienced this. Some of that's balance. You get a little bit too much weight forward without having enough holding weight in the string itself, and that kind of happens today with bows. If you're going to throw on heavier sights and stabilizer setups, and then you're going to run lightweight holding weight.
Right.
So the tighter we can hold that string position, the less of that deviation you're going to have, exactly like what you've described. So when you come to full draw, I just handed this to one of my friends this week. He pulled it back, he ripped it back, like we kind of all do, right? You don't want to not be able
Yeah.
to get the bow
Yeah.
back. So you give it all it's got. And it's one of those worst examples of you hit the wall and then you just kind of the bow kind of rattles around.
Yeah.
And it didn't move. And he pulled it back and he pulled it back again and he was like, it doesn't move. Like I don't feel anything, like nothing twists, nothing. It like how is that in your stabilizers? And I'm like, no, it's in the cam, it's in the alignment, it's in the grip position relative to the string position from brace sight to full draw. Like it was a little bit surprising that he picked up on it, but he's not the only person. As we've had some testers go through that, it is the best alignment we've delivered in our hunting bows, without a doubt. Which helps you get to the target faster, which helps you stay on the target longer, and then ultimately be more accurate.
Well, I'll say one of the things that I really had to focus on with my PSEs, although I loved the comfort at full draw, just being able to like take a nap back there in the pocket.
Yeah,
The thing is, that rattle zone that you talk about, and that was one of the things that was hard. Like if I ever showed video of myself drawing back in slow motion a full draw, as soon as I would hit that stop, it just looked like everything was a wet noodle.
yeah,
And that moment of time is actually a time that for some of these people who reset their hand position once the bow's pulled back so that they feel
yep.
comfortable in the seat of the grip, that is the worst time to do that.
Yeah, it
It
amplifies it.
amplifies it big time. So one of the things that I had to just drill into my own brain with my models for the last 5 years was you cannot change your front hand position once you've put tension on that string. Like you got to find your hands home before you even raise it to draw back. Otherwise, you
Yeah.
risk something like that. Now, there's some tests that we did on the Hoyts in relation to torque characteristics and improving the torque characteristics within the system, not just the riser, but the whole system. And Hoyt has always had less torque than any other bow that I've personally used or been with because of the tech riser. A lot of that adds rigidity into the system to begin with. But when we compare an Alpha X or an RX-8 to the 9 or the new AX2, a 38% reduction in torque, 38%
Yeah.
reduction. And that's only comparing it to ourselves.
Yep.
To some of the other models, which I may or may not have mentioned, we're looking at a difference of torque deviation of 83% difference
Yeah.
between an RX-9 Ultra or a new AX2 versus some of our competitors in their leading models that's going up against us. And this is huge for the people who are honest with themselves and they know that they don't practice as much as they need to. That bow is literally in a case unless it's
Yeah.
going to the range a week before season or whether it's coming out of the case to get to a stand whenever they can. Those people that haven't refined themselves, these key things in relation to torque and minimizing that torque from the get-go, it helps you be more accurate than what you've actually trained to be at that point. So
Yep.
tell me a little bit about what you did on those tests and, what you guys found. Was any of it surprising?
Yeah, I think so. As we dug into it, I mean, this is something that we've looked at for a while. I think, if you've been in archery at any point in time, you've seen some of the videos with lasers, the tilt tamers or things like that added to the cable guard. There was a really in an era of trying to reduce lateral knock travel and induce torque, there were a lot of cable guard systems that were kind of targeting a reduction
Yeah.
over the years, and ultimately there were just limits to those that there were limits in what they could correct. They were targeting one aspect of it, but if you've got low torsional stability in a limb, then you're going to have additional cam lean translation. That translation is going to turn into horizontal knock travel, and you could have the lowest torque in your cable guard system in the industry, and you're still going to have more than a competitive product that has a really torsionally stable limb and axle and cam system. So, those are when as we got to digging into it, we were really looking to separate variables. What's contributing to it? Is it small changes in riser flex? Is it twist? Is it torsional stability within the limb? And so we broke it down by percentages and then just started to attack it. And so, this started in that RX-8 Alpha X generation when we went to wider limbs, we went to shorter limbs, shorter working length limbs, we went to quarter-inch axles. We'd already set the groundwork for where we were headed. And then as we finished that study for alignment, when we were looking at, we would take feedback in, and we generally know what people are trying to say, but it's kind of an interesting dynamic when you get I come to full draw and my arrow is pointed this way and my stabilizer is pointed this way. That's a visual that sometimes you can see. If you put in a shooting machine, you can come up from above it and see
I
that
know.
that's not necessarily exactly what's going on, but that's the visual. And
Yeah.
so the arrow's moving as you come from brace sight to full draw. That rest is not, but so the angle that the arrow's sitting on is, and the stabilizer's not, but the induced torque is moving the handle of the grip whether you feel it or not. And so we kind of came up with our own proprietary test system with some lasers and alignment at fixed distances, and really started to differentiate what was happening at the grip against what string position, lateral knock travel, and then torsional stability of the limb. That was ultimately the test. We ran it on everything, and that's kind of what led us to where we are today.
Yeah, that's so interesting because one of the things that I do when I'm working with people here at the school, and usually these are people that are a little bit higher up, kind of the ladder of their ability and their technique
Yeah.
and their form. But overhead videography, not of themselves as a shooter, but of the system. And
Yeah.
when you're able to have someone on a line leading straight to an X, and then from over the top, you look and their stabilizer is literally pointing to like 130 down at the
Yeah.
target bay. It's literally their stabilizers pointing at bale number two. um, you start to think about, okay, so that's got to return back to bale number one as this arrow is
Yeah.
projecting through it. So one, you start to really appreciate the archers that still put arrows in the same hole with a bunch of that bullshit
Yeah.
going on. And then you think, how dangerous is this person going to be once we find the right combination for them to where they're not fighting that, and honestly,
Yep.
their bad shots are still hanging a line.
On the
Yeah,
mark.
hanging
Yep.
a line. And so I think we were scratching the surface back in the day doing some torque tuning,
Yeah.
focusing on the difference of the sight, the extension
Yep.
of the sight forward or back. Because some people just think the further you put your sight out there, the more fine you can be with your distance, and the more precise you can be with your aiming, having the pin further out there. True, but that comes with a
Yeah.
very, very risky downside of the further you're putting that aiming apparatus away from the pivot point, the more this stuff really starts to be important. And
It
when
gets
you
you.
like,
Yep.
if we used a sight fully extended on that model that had an 83% deficit to an RX-9 Ultra, you have to be the best shooter in the world to keep putting that in the same hole. Like
Yeah.
there's the forgiveness is zero. And a lot of people just they don't understand that. I think some people have said, I don't know what it is, but I just shoot this bow better than I can even shoot. And I think that's when these things just happen. These cards just happen to
Yeah.
fall in line for that person, whether it's a person that's a 32-inch bow that, just loves this freaking long draw setting, and, he feels like he can make a bad shot and they're still in there. But that same bow to a 29-inch archer could be completely worlds different. So
Yeah.
I think it'd be a good time to talk about the other factor of this. And one of the things that's kind of cool, because with the AX229, which is new this year, um, for a lot of people, this is going to be an ideal whitetail setup. This thing is going to be
Yeah.
freaking compact and sweet. But one of the things that we need to look at too is, what does axle to axle length really mean? Because in my opinion, what you really need to look at is, what is the effective string angle in relation to where those strings are actually coming off the cam, and how that cam was shaped so that you're actually adding length to an axle to axle length at full draw. So, like with the
Yeah.
AX229, that bow has the effectiveness of a 31 and a 16th inch, like a Venom.
Yeah. Yep. VTM
Yeah.
31. They're basically the same effective string angle.
Okay, so talk about how you guys are really looking at axle to axle length, and how the axle to axle length number should actually be looked at a little bit differently from the shooter that's using it.
Yeah. For me, I think in hunting situations, I want the smallest, most compact bow I can get away with. So that's on the hunting side. For archery, for target, or for shooting in the yard, I tend to get some benefits from having a longer axle to axle bow. String head position and string angle can dictate where anchor lives, and how what my natural head position is, and how I can be repeatable. Ultimately, it's consistency that I can deliver. And the less comfortable I am trying to match up to a really tight string angle, then the less accurate I'm going to be ultimately. So in the last generation of product, we changed some of our design concepts for cams and limbs, and we translate that cam from brace height to full draw less than we ever have. It's the least amount of translation we've ever had. Paired that with some larger string tracks and where we ultimately roll the cam over at full draw, you've got what are the longest effective axle to axles or what broadest effective string angles that we've delivered. And instead of just leaving it there, we took advantage of it. We said if we've got a 30, we want to move down to a 29. We want to push that limit. We want that 29 to shoot just as good as any other 30 or 31 and now be the most compact bow that we can build for a saddle hunter, for someone who predominantly hunts out of a ground blind, for someone in a tree stand. That's what that bow's targeted for. When you get into the ultra models or even the Alpha AX2, the longer model there is a 32 now. So every bow model is stepped down in its axle to axle length because we're taking advantage of that broader string angle. The bows shoot just as good, if not better. Now we've been able to shorten them. It allows us to stiffen the riser in that shorter platform. It then allows us to remove some additional weight. So there's weight savings in almost every model in these series of bows. And then shoot as good or better than any prior generation bow you compare it to. Our grip position plays a role in that. We've continued to maintain, our kind of center balance target. We've got a strategic grip position that's different than a few bows out there. If you go take measurements, we account for that in the cam systems and how we want them to work. And I think, in my opinion, this is kind of the best group of hunting bows we've ever put together, bar none. And that comes from saving weight by shortening bows to make them more compact, and then tightening everything up from a delivery standpoint, and improving natural point of aim. It's one of those that you look at it and you see some differences and you shoot it and you kind of are scratching your head why it's as different as it is. It's the devil's in the details and a lot of the things in this project for sure.
Yeah, I was so happy when I came and met with you guys and I kind of said like, "Hey, I know I'm coming in mid-year, so it's not like I can build something from the ground up." And when I saw the specs on the 9 Ultra, I'm like, I kind of looked at Zach and I'm like, you guys knew that I was coming, didn't you? Because you bring out the 33 and the 6 and those numbers like are really good for me and they also have just historically been really forgiving for a big spectrum of draw length archers.
Yeah.
Because a lot of it has to do with what we're talking about, axle to axle length versus effective string angle length. And with these new systems, you're really getting the benefits of what like some of us that used to shoot a 35-inch hunting bow to be the
Yeah.
medium between, our target time of the year and our hunting time of the year. It seemed like that 35 was the number. Well, with an RX9 Ultra, we're pretty much getting that string angle of the 35, but we're getting it in a bow that's still compact for maneuverability and then, being in that blind as well. So you talked about you kind of talked about grip position, and I think that's really important because a lot of people have grip positions in different areas, and it causes them to really have to weight their bows a lot differently. And honestly, one of the things that was always a hurdle for me was just being top heavy as a Matthews shooter. It was a very
Yeah.
top heavy system, and it just everything has to be loaded different. One of the things that my hat's off to you guys, the first thing I did when I got my RX8 Ultra was I shot it a few times and then I tore that grip off and I actually made some grips that I was just assuming would instantly make this thing the love of my life. But
Yeah.
that bow right there, as you can see, is fully stock. I actually went back to the molded grip on that
Yeah,
bow, and then the same thing happened when I got the nine. I shot it a little bit and I removed it for a little while, and then I realized that kind of the depth of that grip and the position of the grip and the riser, they really mirrored each other really well. And I honestly have never had such a stock setup shoot as good as it did. And honestly, I think my body from 13 years of shooting a Hoyt or whatever it was, I think it didn't take my mind
just
muscle
adapted. Yeah,
connection very long to feel at home again. But that doesn't mean that my lefts and rights are going to come together the way they did, because even a very seasoned archer, you have to continually polish that blade, and you kind of take the rough parts off here and there, but then the difference for a lot of these guys becomes like X count. And for me, that really narrows
yeah,
down my left to right margin. And I think that really comes from knowing the tunability of an arrow and how spine um, and that lateral travel, how those two kind of work opposingly or work together
yeah,
to give you the left and right margin that you want, which is hopefully zero. But
yeah,
also, it's not just the point that you're letting go and what that's doing. It's the bow hand is the first and the last thing to determine the path of that arrow. It's the first thing to contact it to determine torque, and it's the last thing that bow is on as that arrow is clearing the system. So my hat's off to whoever did the grip for this thing, because although I kind of feel like I would like it to be a little narrower and flatter, I shoot better with it the way it is. So, do you want to go into a little bit more detail about that? Because I honestly haven't asked anybody there since I left 5 years ago. And if I look back to, like a Defiant or something like that, very different beast with
yeah.
what I would feel and what I needed in that grip to get the results I wanted.
Yep. Yeah, I think in that generation of product, when we started attacking new grip projects, and probably since then we've done at least two, if not three, small variations and changes. When you get a group of guys in our engineering department that are all shooting a lot, you start to get to that place where it's like, well, if we make it flat and square, this will reduce surface area on the grip, and then that should be better for everybody. And that's just not the way the world works. It's when you get into comfort is a big part of accuracy. You can see it in precision rifles, with adjustable stocks and length of throw, and those stocks are adjustable because you need to adapt and make yourself comfortable. The more comfortable you are, the more solid you are, the better you're going to shoot. So when we go do a grip, I mean, I'll be honest, I almost don't like attacking those projects because it's a lot of iteration. We're 3D printing multiple models per day, and then we're doing variations of durometer and ranges of materials. And we've got to get the subjective feedback. We've got to kick it through our department, but then into other departments. It's one of those areas where Zach, our president, he's going to want to weigh in, and his experience and how it feels. And it's not an easy thing to get right because everybody's anatomically different. And so when we're trying to get what I'm going to say is an optimized grip, we want to target the narrowest band of changes due to grip contact we can. But then we realize, not everybody's going to shoot with their hand at 45 degrees. There's going to be some guys grab it just like you'd shoot a pistol. And that's where, like, the contours of that grip and the shape that's around it, it's accommodating everyone that we can. But the target, really, our focus is to develop that to be as consistent as possible. And so when you start really looking at it, you'll notice like radii that change and transition from bottom to top. You'll notice flat areas that are strategically placed, but then it blends out into a little larger radius. And that's to balance comfort with function. And well, I mean, I'm glad you like it. Grips are one of those things. You
Yeah.
either like it or you don't.
Yeah.
It's coming off. where it's staying on.
Yeah,
So
grips are so personal. Well, I guess one last thing I want to talk about is well, did we talk about the split harness? I think we did. We did touch on that a little bit, right? And how that all plays into the system because I wanted to talk about strings and cables. So, from
sure.
a string and cable point of view, kind of went from three pieces to the five piece because now you do have that split harness that's giving you some
Yep.
adjustability on the top, which is important to be able to kind of fine tune that lateral travel that we talked about. But I've actually been really, really impressed with the strings and cables, the new Wireworks. And I'm happy. Zach kind of said like, hey, we're diving deeper into that realm. So you guys
Yeah.
knew that I've really been fixated on strings and cables. And honestly, I kind of pulled back from that realm when I was at PSE, just because honestly that was kind of a bugaboo with Pete. So I had to just back up and stay out of that world. But I actually want to jump in there a little bit more because there's so many people, and honestly, there's so many shops that just want that instant upsell of replacing strings and cables. However, there's certainly some where they know they're going to see that bow back and need to
Yeah.
tune it again in a week if they don't do that up front. Um, so having a string and cable that keeps that system in tune, it's definitely critical. But what people don't realize is once again, the details are what makes the difference. The devil's in the details. And honestly, there's definitely a devil in strings and cable replacement because people don't realize, and maybe this isn't the case in all engineering departments because I don't know all the different engineering departments, but how a string is made and what a string is made of are huge factors in the performance. And a string that performs great in one system is not necessarily going to perform great in another system. And I actually went through several strings from very reputable makers that just were not performing on my particular setups. And I think a lot of that just has to do with diameter of material, honestly, the type of serving materials people are choosing to use. Because as a consumer, what we don't realize is there's marketing power in saying so and so doesn't use this more expensive serving material, blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah. However, there's downsides to certain types of serving materials and why they actually would not be used in a certain place on a string because of the negative effects of that. So, kind of from an engineer's point of view, and Wireworks is what, 1 or 2 years old now. It's made a few.
Yeah.
It made a huge evolution from the Fuse, obviously, huge jump. But as it's actually become Wireworks, we're still working to how do we actually make this even more bulletproof. And what I tell people
Sure.
is Hoyt had the ability to make whatever string they wanted out of they could literally build the machines that build the strings. So with
Yeah.
that said, you're not choosing certain materials, you're not choosing certain twist directions, you're not minimizing strand count so that you can say that your string is faster. So let's talk about what you guys actually did and why the Wireworks are so perfectly paired with the new Hoyts.
Yeah, I'd say we've been doing some good internal string building for a number of years now. We've got our own layup machines that have tensioning systems that, regardless of what string we're pulling through, provide even tension as they do the layup for us. I'd say most people envision string building with kind of, a bar and that spool tied off, and then somebody kind of running around that square layup, right? We've got proprietary machines that we've built that will actually set up the layup links on those bars. It spins the spools in and pre-tension systems. We've got our own tension and twisting systems that have proprietary software built into them that manage the length, continuously monitor it throughout the process. And so as you get small variations in string material of different colors that have different amounts of dye, your flow colors are a little different than just your natural or maybe your blacks and grays. We've got a lot of things that we have to manage when we go to finish that string. And so all of those affect your performance, but also the performance of that string and cable set. So, the evolution of Wireworks has really been digging into our process to build as much consistency as we possibly can to build the most stable string and cable set in the industry. I think, when you discuss, some of the secrets or, things that are critical, we go through a really in-depth design process when it comes to our loop size and length, what length of serving that we're going to serve, where we're going to place that, and then how we're going to close that into the loop we need it to be, so it fits correctly in the track, so it fits over the loop end, and eliminates wear. An aftermarket string builder can make some great strings, but they don't necessarily have our string drawings. And so if they're doing a great job, and there are a few out there that are doing some really good stuff, they're basically reverse engineering our stuff. But I'd say for the vast majority, they've got a standard process, a standard loop, and they kind of want that to work with anything that they build. So internally, we're not just building strings, we're designing strings for the system. And, I can give you, I think last year we went through kind of a iteration of changing our string weights and servings, and we ran through kind of a loop of testing, and we got a range of 26 feet per second difference from building it within our process of the materials we chose, and variations in the process, and then string weight locations and how we applied them, on the same bow.
Yeah, that's incredible.
That's the type of performance difference that you can see. And unless you're shooting them through a chrono, when you go replace them, you don't know what you've got.
Yeah.
It may seem the same, but it often isn't.
Yeah, and a lot of times people that just want a certain, they just, hey, I want this string. This is supposedly the best. I mean, it could be the best for a particular model it was built and tested around, but that doesn't mean,
Yeah,
like you said, those weights being in the same place or their serving length being the same size or, the diameter of that thing being the same size throughout all their stuff.
yeah,
That doesn't mean it's maximized for this. And I can tell you, the first few years I was at PSE, I actually, was getting away with just reserving everything. Um, but certainly did not end there. And honestly, the whole time I was originally at Matthews, all of our shooters were like secretly wanting to shoot different aftermarket strings.
yeah,
Um,
sure.
and with this one, again, I've got a stock center serving on there. I have replaced my D loop because I put several thousand through this thing. But a magnitude of climate temperatures and moisture variation, and then just a lot of abrasion and wear and tear. And, what a lot of people don't realize is even though you may just want a Vectran material, the Vectran material, even though you might have zero stretch, but if you're having to replace that in 6 months because of the natural wear that a pure Vectran is going to have, it's going to fuzz
Yeah,
up and fray and it's going to break down faster. It may not stretch, but it won't have the longevity, for integrity from an integral point of
sure.
view.
Yep.
So finding that happy medium is really, really important. And I think the reason I wanted to bring that up is because for these people that go in and buy a flagship model, but then immediately spend a few $100s putting a different set of strings and cables on there, you're looking at a price tag of a bow. And I want people to make sure they understand that when they're looking at a price tag on a new RX-9 Ultra, don't ruin this thing by going in and just taking that factory set of strings and cables off because you might not be doing yourself justice. You've actually paid for
Yeah,
that in the price, and it's
yep.
a justifiable contribution to the price of that product. So give it a test run. I think you're going to be
Yeah.
very, very pleasantly surprised. And I think that you're going to see the price of that bow, it comes to you as in a complete package.
Yep, it's ready to rock. You mentioned wear. 452X is a material that I think has kind of been an industry staple for a long time for BCY. It's a great material, but it does use a higher amount of
Yep.
Vectran. So we use X99. It uses a lower Vectran count. It's a higher grade Dyneema in that mix. We still get great stability, but we bump our strand counts up. So we use 28 strands of X99. That combo then reduces fuzzing and fraying. So if you're tapping your jacket occasionally when or trying to wear
Occasionally.
an arm guard,
Yeah.
late season shooting or whatever, or out here in the mountains in Utah, that when we're falling down rock faces and stuff, when you get to the end of the season, your string's still in great shape. You've got very minimal breakdown in that string, a little bit of wax, and you're back up and ready to go. And that we did abrasion testing on that. We looked at servings and how we applied them to not only have high performance but also have longevity in that. And like I said, I've been running them for a few years exclusively. I use them on target bows and hunting bows, and I just don't have any complaints. Peeps stay straight, performance is good, and I'll shoot them for full season and then some. Especially with target bows, a lot of times I don't even swap them. I'll just Stratos. I had a bow for 2 years, and I ran the same setup for indoor, outdoor, indoor, outdoor the whole
That's
time.
awesome.
So
Yeah, that's awesome. And, you know, for the average person, they need to be able to have that trust in that product too. And I think it's important that when we can finally trust a manufacturer that is building that quality of a string for their bows, you also have the added comfort of knowing that the consistency of the replacement product is going to match what was on it to
yeah,
begin with. Because that's what's hard is, you go and you swap out your strings and cables right away. And then even if a year or two down the road you want to put on another set, and maybe, even if you go to a reputable string manufacturer, that does not mean that process or that the product within the process is the same or especially matched for your particular model or your brand. So that's one of the things that I really like, as I changed out string colors or, honestly, I did do a string swap on my Alpha 33 just because originally it came in one color scheme. I kind of switched it over to another and I kind of after a few months, I did a color swap, and my ability to like change those out, get my cams right back to the little temporary marks that I made, and then get my knock point at 90 degrees and tie it on there. I was literally within 1 yard on my site. I was able to move my gang
yeah.
adjustment, and that thing was bang on again and already seated. So I really liked it. Is there any other things, Brian, that you want to talk about or address to the industry in relation to the 2025 launch or not? I mean, the floor is
Um,
yours.
I think we've covered most everything. We talked some weight reduction, and I think you'll see that in some of our specs. Those will be listed. I think one of the key things to remember there is that, when we advertise weight, it's without damping accessories. And so our out of the box weights moved more than what the specs will show. The aluminum bows, we dropped shock pods off of there. We didn't need them. We shortened those risers. We removed some weight there. We got a new damper designed. And we saved some weight in that damper as well. So, while I think a lot of our specs are going to look like 2/10 of a pound, a quarter of a pound, the reality is some of those bows are up to 4/10 of a pound out of the box weight.
Right.
Which that's where you start to really make a difference in a decision on what bow you want and what you can accessorize on it. That's it's enough to decide whether you want a new sidebar or not.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, on
but
mine, mine's got all these bloody and cruddy arrows on there. On mine, I really still like a traditional stabilizer, and I'll tell people why. I I set my bow down a lot this way as a hunter, and I really like having my sight have clearance from the ground, and that length gives me this clearance right underneath my sight whenever I set my bow
Yeah,
down straight like this because my, my ghost sticks aren't always deployed out, and so
yeah,
I like this, but what I have been able to do since kind of going to the new stabilizer that you have in the lower position, I'm keeping that right in front of the ghost sticks, and I've been able to I've taken 2 ounces of weight off the stabilizer that I traditionally shot all the time was always 3 ounces, um, you know, approximately 10 inches from the front of
yeah,
the grip forward. So I've been able to take some weight off that one, without like losing the feel and the feedback that I like by
sure.
sticking with this one. And so that weight has kind of just moved places and it's being utilized a little bit more efficiently, deadening
Yeah,
that vibration as soon as it's coming off the limb pocket and before it gets up to the hand. So I've really liked the combination of both with that thing.
yeah, for sure.
Well, all I have to do is find 3 more arrows that aren't bloody and get some new broadheads. And this thing is ready to go on the next road trip. But it looks absolutely beat up and disgusting. But I've made it a point to not clean this thing all year. And actually, somebody came by yesterday and they were looking at it and they're like, "Do you really have blood like stained into your powder coating?" And I'm like, "Yes." Yes, there
That's
is.
awesome.
But
That's what we want you to do with them.
yeah, it
That's what
is.
they're there
And
for.
really that comes down to like the last thing I said, which is like the dependability of a Hoyt. I mean, the dry fire testing, I think sets a whole different bar in the industry, but just the ability of, you know, being able to like I said, bump a cam, uh,
Yeah,
have someone not handle your bow properly, it falling over, being in a rock where you hit it and maybe you like hit a little fracture on the limb where you get a little bit of lift, but just the
yep,
Hoyt limbs are different than a lot of the limbs on the market that kind of come from one location. So
yep.
yeah,
Yeah, we have an internal test. We just call it the axle strike. But I mean, that's part of the test and a pocket alignment. Is the pocket robust enough? We just take it and we hit the axle on the ground as hard as we can and look for a point of impact shift. And if it doesn't meet it, then we're going to update the pocket or the axle. Something's changing because that stuff's going to happen. It's going to fall out of a tree stand. You need to pull it, be able to go down and get it, pick it back up, and be confident and take a shot if you get an opportunity.
yeah, I love that, dude. I love that. Well, Brian, thanks so much for coming on. I know people listening, for all the non-Hoyt people are going to be like, "Oh yeah, well, Dudley, of course you're going to have the Hoyt engineer in there." But
No,
it's different than that.
it's been
Yeah,
good.
it's different than that. There's definitely um there's just there's a different vibe in the Hoyt Beat Laboratory, from someone who has been behind the curtain across probably half of the industry's bow departments. There's just a very, very different dynamic, and it's always been that way since I've been. I mean, especially since, Cooper and Zach and Daniel and Gideon, were
Yeah.
all back there when I first started, 20 years ago when I was,
Who all, I guess, all but one are still here.
yeah, well,
There's some longevity
yeah,
back
and
here.
Darren would be like, make no mistake about it. If
Yeah.
someone if they fired him from his electronical nuclear tunnel that he's buried in wherever the heck he is underground, if he ever got
Yeah.
to crawl out of that gopher hole, I'll guarantee you he'd be right back in Salt Lake making
There's no
cams
doubt.
again. So, yeah, I love that. And I mean, I think when I was doing a podcast with Zach, we talked about how many people at Hoyt have been just there since they kind of came out of engineering school or whatever. And you look at the amount of people that are target archers, they do Vegas, they do Reading, they shoot at the center with all you guys. And then, arguably some of the most legit hunting in the US is the Wasatch Front,
Yeah.
depending on where you're at there, no question about it. So, I mean, you've got engineers that are literally going from, Vegas to Reading to Tax to the Wasatch Front and grinding it out there for a whole season. And then you have a full department of this. You have a breeding ground for people that are just going to build a really robust, dependable system. And that's what
Yeah.
I continue to tell people when it comes to what the real difference is. The difference is I stopped traveling with two bows, honestly, 6 months after I came to Hoyt. And even now I went to Africa with a bunch of people. Some people brought multiple bows, and I'm just like, I'm good, dude. Un-
I got my
Unless I
rig
cut
ready
this
to
string
rock.
with a broadhead, I'm good to go. Yeah.
Yep. That's
Well, good
awesome.
luck on the launch, man. I appreciate it. And
Yeah. Looking forward to it.
let's get in the Beat Laboratory and come out with a cool collaboration together. I'm looking forward to the future down the road.
Yep. We're ready for it.
Cool, man. And congrats on a nice buck too. You shot a hell of a whitetail.
Yeah, thank you. That was a pretty wild burn and turn. Drove from Utah 22 hours, ripped a few days in the stand, and then ripped it another 22 back.
Well,
I'm still playing a little recovery from that, but it was a good week
well, thanks for coming on a podcast with me, dude. I appreciate it and look forward to seeing you out there on the archery field somewhere.
for sure. We'll
Thanks,
see you.
Brian. Be sure to check out knockonarchery.com for our full line of custom designed products, as well as free in-depth education and bow hunting entertainment to help you shoot at your best.